Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's brilliant to see you. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. I know how busy everyone is, and big welcome to what is the second year of this sector's ESG trends report for charities and social enterprises. I'm Richard Litchfield, Chief Exec of Eastside People, and your host today. We've got a couple of things on offer this morning. The first main thing is that we're going to be sharing with you and releasing the findings from this year's report, which my colleague Rebecca, who authored the report, is going to do. We're also joined by a brilliant panel who are going to help me to discuss different themes and talk about some of their own experiences with aspects of ESG. And we're joined by Dr. Wayne Full from the British Psychotherapy Foundation, Tracy Bush, Chief Exec of OneFARD, Learning Disabilities and Autism Charity, Roberta Fusco from Akivo, the Charity CEOs Network, and Nick Temple from Social Investment Business. Before we get going, though, folks, properly, I do need to cover off some housekeeping. So the session will have slides. It will be recorded as well, and we'll share both of those for you after the event. It's a webinar format, which means that you'll be muted on the call. We're expecting the content to be about 70 minutes, and we'll make sure that that we've finished up by then. And just a big encouragement to everyone, please use the chat. The chat's open. Do ask questions, share experiences. We'd love to hear from you. And if you wanted to just introduce yourselves now in the chat, that'd be a fantastic way to start. Cloud captions are available. You just need to enable them on your devices. And I'm also joined by a number of Eastside People colleagues, Bernice, Mike, Sunit, and they will be helping throughout the event for particularly technical questions around ESG. And we'll be posting different ESG resources that you might like to look at. So let me just set the scene for today's event. So they say a week is a long time in politics. Well, it feels like an absolute eternity since we were here a year ago, given the amount of change that there's been in the environment around sustainability and diversity. At a macro level, we've seen this erosion of political will for diversity and sustainability coming from the US. But on the ground, there's also renewed encouragement for charities to report on their environmental, social and governance activities. And we hope more than anything that this project and the survey tool that we have is part of an ecosystem of support and resources that you can lean on. What we're doing today is reporting on the trends and insights that have been aggregated from 141 charities who have submitted their data with us. Each of those organisations took the digital survey of about 40 questions in the summer. They each received an individual report on their progress, benchmark against the rest of the 141 organisations. I think we should also start with a quick definition. What do we mean by ESG for charities? Quite simply, we see it as the way that you measure and manage essentially what is not financial. What makes us good places to work? How do we reward staff? What's our environmental footprint? How do we measure our impact? Are we well run? Are we well governed? Each organisation that has taken the survey has the opportunity to report on how important a particular area of ESG is to them. We call that materiality, and how much progress they're making. And I think what we found is that gives a really nice framework for helping charities to get their arms around what is a very broad subject. It's customized, this approach is customized to charities. It's blind of cause or subsector, and we believe is relevant to whatever size organisation you are. And I think that's kind of been demonstrated by just the variety of different types and sizes of organisations that have taken the survey so far. So, without any further ado, I'm going to invite our first speaker today, Roberta from Akivo, to just say a few words. They're our key sponsor and have been really an important, significant partner in the project. Roberta.
Thanks so much, Richard. And morning, everyone. It's lovely to be here. I'm Roberta. I'm head of influencing from Akivo. I can see that some of our members are on the call, but some of you may not know us. We are a membership body for charity chief executives, but also social enterprises, and it's chief executives, but also aspiring chief execs. And essentially, it's kind of a leadership. We care about leadership of the sector. We have around about 1,700 members, and we do a range of things. My area is influencing, but we also kind of offer support, training, coaching, and so on. And we're delighted to partner with these side people on this ESG report. It's so important. And we'll come and talk I'll be talking a little bit about kind of CEO salaries, but there's more to the sector, and ESG is so vitally important to it. So thank you very much for inviting us along to this webinar and for partnering.
Thanks, Roberta. Yeah, that's it's been amazing having you guys involved, and yeah, we're really grateful for that support. So now I'm going to hand over to Rebecca, who's the report's author, to walk through some of the key findings. Rebecca, over to you.
Thanks, Richard. And I'm hoping that Mike is going to begin screen sharing. Okay, fantastic. So for the next 15 to admittedly 18 minutes or so, I'm going to present some of the key insights and findings from this year's report. So that includes a bit of an overview of who took part, a very top level summary of what the survey covers, and then diving into some of the highlights from the data and analysis in the report. But we don't have long, so I'll be moving through the information quite quickly. So to sort of reassure you, everything I'm about to go through is included in the report we're launching today, with a lot more information and detail to boot. So this is my first of, I'd imagine, quite a few plugs to go to the report to see more information. So on the next slide, you can see a bit of an overview of who took part. You can see the number and range of participating organisations on the screen by size of income. Organisations from all 4 nations took part, as did organisations working internationally. This year we built on last year's findings, so that 141 organisations represents the pooled data from both our first and second year cohorts, and that just allows us to give you findings from a broader, richer data set. So on the next slide, so last year we went into quite a bit of detail of how we developed the tool and how it works. Not doing that this year, but there's a lot of detail on all of that in the appendices to the report itself. For now, I'll just say that at the start of the survey, participating organisations answer some general questions about them so that we know kind of who's doing the survey, and then some questions about their approach to ESG in terms of their sort of strategical and practical actions that they're taking. And then, as you can see, in each of E, S, and G, these 3 pillars, we've sort of broken down our survey questions into 2 sections of each. So the first set of questions will be generally more internal facing. And then the second set of questions for each area, each pillar of ESG, will be a bit more external facing. So that's how the survey works. Then on the next slide, just a bit of a recap. I mean, Richard alluded to this, but it feels like right now more than ever, perhaps we've said this a bit before, but right now more than ever, this feels like a pivotal moment for ESG. I mean, there are some real headwinds facing the sector, financial pressures, so the triple squeeze of rising costs, reduced funding, increased demand that we're all talking about. Richard alluded to this quite disruptive global context. And I think, I think you're right, Richard, to pick out the kind of the atmospheric change that is kind of bringing what feels like a bit of an erosion around the consensus that we have had around the value of equity, diversity, and inclusion, and also climate action, sustainability. So these are the real headwinds. But then at the same time, sort of at home, a lot is changing, and we're seeing, for example, the new version, the updated will apply for accounting periods from January, really sort of ups some of the reporting expectation on larger organisations. But meanwhile, I think we feel like there are just increased expectations in the works. So, for example, the new Charity Governance Code is creating a tighter link between good governance, EDI, and sustainability. And I add that in here because it really has informed our interpretation of the data we've received this year. So from here on out, I'm now going to look at our key findings. And just to reiterate, I'm really going to canter through these slides, but there's all of this detail and much more in the report itself. And also in the report itself, quite a bit more of our qualitative data that organisations provided to us. Okay, so on to the next slide. Firstly, our first sort of key finding is that this is a really confusing landscape for not-for-profit organisations. There's a lot of overlapping approaches out there. There are changing expectations that I just mentioned. And sort of to, I suppose, understand what that looks like in practice, participating organisations, as we've said on the slide, report using over 100 external ESG-related accreditations, standards, frameworks, and marks. In the report, we include a resource bank of all of these and then analyse and try and understand sort of who's using what, where, and why. Pulling out from that, interestingly, we saw that 53% of those participating organisations are using one or more of these accreditations, etc., in relation to their impact on their people. And that's the highest percentage of all elements of ESG. But at the same time, 81% of organisations told us that they want to better understand how they're doing in ESG, what their next steps should be, and that they need more support. So, so our conclusion is, despite all this, they want and need more charity-facing support, resources, and guidance to help them take an integrated strategic approach to ESG, which they say they want to do. And on that point, on the next slide, we'll dive for the first time into some of the data we present in the report. So we've got two sort of data donuts here. You can see that these are the findings from our ESG overview questions. So on the left, does your organisation have an ESG strategy? 10% no, and said no, they don't see the need. So the flip side of that is that 90% of organisations either have a holistic, a basic strategy, or they don't, but they are considering it. And from our perspective, this indicates a broad-based buy-in for ESG as a concept across the sector at the moment. Meanwhile, the donut on the right looks at organisations' ESG reporting in their last annual report. 43% saying they report minimally and only to the extent required by regulation. Our qualitative data also told us that organisations are keen to make progress in all areas, but that they need more tailored support and practical guidance, resource in particular, to do that. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, I'm now going to move to the next key finding, which is, as you can see, that environmental progress lags behind social and governance progress overall across participating organisations, and that many organisations focus on low or no cost environmental initiatives. I mean, given the financial context, I think it's probably unsurprising that not-for-profits told us that they are focused on preserving funds for their core activities now more than ever. But what this translates at is their appetite, as we see it, both to develop a holistic ESG strategy and to progress in areas like the environment where they're not an environment-focused organisation, is essentially outpacing capacity to do so on a sector-wide scale. In the report, we go into some of the compelling arguments that the organisations have mentioned to why they want to integrate environmental progress, even in their long-term strategy, even where it's proving very challenging to do so. So we look at the potential financial win-wins, the fact that donors, commissioners and regulators' kind of expectations in this area are increasing, and that a new, more climate-focused younger generation is coming into the workforce and what that might mean. And that's why we say that, while financial caution is sensible, we see environmental progress moving from a nice to have to a strategic necessity. So on the next slide, again, a bit of a taster, I think, of the data that's in the report. So that quote on the right is just a sort of an example of the qualitative data that has informed our understanding of the quantitative data. And then on the left, you can see that what we've got there is an overview chart that presents the average progress scores across all participating organisations for each of those 6 sections of the report. The average here at 2.5, and at the bottom, environment, both elements of environment are lagging behind the average. So the average sits closer to starting out than to advanced. And I'm talking about starting out to advanced. I'm talking about our progress spectrum. Which runs from starting out through developing to advancing and advanced. And you can find a lot of guidance and more definitions on those categories and how organisations use them in the survey in our report. So on to the next slide. This is really just to show you that we have a lot of more granular data in our report on every topic. So, for example, here you can see that we saw that almost 2/3, 65% of organisations told us that they don't measure their carbon footprint. And then we cut the data by size and found that for organisations with under £1 million annual turnover, this rises to 83%. On the right, those quotes are kind of corroborating what we said about no and low cost initiatives. So the cost associated with activities like carbon footprint measurement are proving a real stumbling block. Okay, so on to the next slide. This is our third key insight, which is around staff considerations. So earlier I noted that the S of ESG encompasses staff and social impact on beneficiaries and the wider community. So with that in mind, we found that when it comes to the S, many organisations are really choosing to focus on those areas that directly relate to supporting and developing staff in their roles. And we can see from the best practice that organisations are telling us about that the sector really leads by example on staff wellbeing, prioritising staff experience and innovating to engage staff in all aspects of their organisations. Across the first 2 years of the survey, staff considerations have just emerged as a clear ESG priority. The survey question on staff wellbeing received the highest importance rating, so 92% of organisations told us that was very important to them. That's the highest rating across the survey. And it's also an area, in fact, where organisations are making greatest progress. So the conclusion that we can take from this is just that organisations emphatically recognise the value of their staff, what they bring to organisations, and want to deliver a positive experience for them. But then there is quite a heavy caveat here, which is that nevertheless, as a sector, we can see from our data that we just need to do much, much more to effectively embed equity, diversity and inclusivity within our organisations. Okay, so on the next slide, we look at some of the data sitting behind this. So on the left, this is telling us that 74% of organisations are paying all their staff at least a real living wage. And of course, there's a 26% flip side to that. Small charities in particular acknowledge that they need to preserve funds to prioritise impact on beneficiaries. And that means that pay levels cannot compete with other sectors on the whole. So what we're understanding from what organisations tell us is that they're prioritising staff experience in part to mitigate the relatively lower salaries they can pay. And when we say sort of leading the way, how that manifests is just a really wide adoption of flexible working and non-pay benefits to the extent that they can offer them, they do. So then the next slide comes back to this point on equity, diversity and inclusion. So this year's data, confirms an emerging trend that we identified last year, and that's the inadequate representation, as you can see in these donuts, of Black, Asian and other racially minoritized communities in leadership roles. So on the left, 67% of participating organisations said they had no one from any of those communities in executive leadership positions. And on the right, 30% of organisations said they had no one from Black, Asian or other racially minoritized communities on their board. In fact, we also see that almost a quarter, 24%, have no one from these communities on either their leadership, their executive leadership team or their board. And in the report, we go into a fair bit more detail here, and we've included some analysis and opinion on the trustee diversity statistics the Charity Commission published in the spring. Okay, so on the next slide, we move away from staff considerations more onto the sort of other side of S, the social impact on beneficiaries and the wider community. This chart on the left is comparing importance ratings. So you can see that 71% pink bar tells you that 71% of organisations that took part told us this statement was very important to them. And the statement is, we have a theory for how we make an impact, how we achieve this, and why we're confident this is the best approach. And 71% is high, it's good, but when we compare it against the average for all the staff consideration statements, it's coming in slightly lower, or I think materially lower than that 82% average. That trend of social impact or considerations around beneficiaries sitting slightly lower in terms of materiality than staff considerations carries across the survey. And we have a theory for that, or we have an understanding and interpretation of that in the report, which you can read there. But as a spoiler, I suppose, our understanding is it's not that organisations are prioritising staff over their beneficiaries, but rather that as a means to achieve the organisational sustainability required to impact beneficiaries in the longer term, organisations have to focus on their staff. We've all been talking about kind of recruitment and retention rates. I'm not actually going to look at all at the chart on the right of this slide. So this is a real teaser, but it's just to show you that we have some analysis, some data on what organisations are doing beyond impact on their beneficiaries and how appropriate it is to think about that for not-for-profit organisations. But I'll move on now to the next slide, which is on governance practices. So there's a whole section of the report that goes into a lot of detail, a lot of data on governance practices. This is just such a tiny sample of that. More than anything, really, to highlight that in the report, we do break down our cohort by size of organisation, where we think there are some interesting findings under there. So here you can see that the data does indicate that larger organisations are making greater progress in these areas around board development activities than smaller. Look, it is a modest discrepancy, but at the same time, it's there. So on the right, there's an example of a smaller organisation under £1 million annual income, explaining to us some of the challenges they face. And we did see across the cohort that smaller organisations telling us more often that they're struggling to attract trustees to fill vacancies, and that their trustees are facing so many demands on their time. It can be a real challenge to do these development activities with them. There's loads more on the governance side of things in the report, including data on trustee numbers, length of service, compared to the Charity Governance Code best practice. But my time is always almost up. I can see Richard slightly shifting in his chair, don't worry. On the next slide, this just looks ahead to highlight really that the report has some really interesting data on how prepared organisations are for the challenges and the changes we know are coming. So on the left, in May, June, July this year, almost a quarter of organisations told us that they were not aware of the anticipated changes to SORP. On the right, we asked a question relating to the prospect of new minimum energy efficiency standards, raising the minimum requirement in the social rented sector by 2030 to EPC band C. And if you're really sharp-eyed and able to listen and read that at the same time, you'll see that this is, by the looks of things, going to pose a real challenge. So that's really it. Look, there is way more in the report. And on the next slide, I've created a sample platter of what's available. So there's a lot of additional data, examples of good practice and innovation, which I haven't had time to go into in the way that we'd really like to, because it's such an important element of what we're doing here. A spotlight section on environment-focused organisations and a resource bank. So please do look through the report, and at the same time, I'll be here for the rest of the session, sticking around to answer questions in the chat on the data and the report. But for now, that is me, and I'll hand back to you, Richard. Thanks.
Thanks, Rebecca. That was brilliant. No mean feat to give that whistle stop tour. Thanks. And yeah, just to encourage everyone, if you've got questions or comments, whether it's about the data that Rebecca was just presenting on, or if you'd like to ask any of our panel a question, then please put it in the chat, and we'll do our best to get there. So without any further ado, I'm gonna now move us on to have that discussion and welcome our panel into the webinar properly. My first question is going to be to the two organisations that actually participated in the survey this year, which are Wayne's organisations and Tracy's. And the question actually to you both is, can you briefly tell us a bit about your organisation and why you participated in the survey? And I think I'll go to you first, Wayne, please.
Hi. Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me this morning. My organisation is the British Psychotherapy Foundation, and we're a leading psychotherapy training and membership body based in London and Newcastle. So we provide membership and training for psychotherapists working with adults, infants, adolescents, and and we work in a particular modality, which I won't go into. And as well as offering training and membership services, we also run a low-fee clinical service for the public. And so over the last 3 years, the BPF has undergone a huge period of growth and transformation. So we've expanded from 9 staff to 42. We've increased our turnover from 1 million to almost 3 million. We've grown our training programs from 4 to 11, and our membership has increased from 500 to 800 members. Now, as I was preparing for this talk, I realized that it's because under the new leadership, our new CEO and the new board that we have, that ESG has been taken very seriously. And I think that's been the biggest driver of our success over this 3-year period. I used to work for the BPF. I worked in 2017 for the organization, and I worked in 2020. I always believed in it, but I never stayed. But I've come back this time and I've stayed, and I'm happy. And I know now it's because the investment in ESG has been so important, particularly under the social, I would say, is what appeals to me. But I know on the governance as well, the organization has gone to another level, including also having an audit and risk committee that had never existed previously, that really helps to have scrutiny around governance. So that was, and one of the main reasons why we wanted to do the survey is, for us, ESG considerations are absolutely central to our success. And we certainly see it in terms of retention, the credibility and trust we're able to have in the wider sector. We see the motivation and engagement that it gives staff. And for us, having a benchmark against other organizations is really important. It's going to improve our reporting to the Charity Commission, but we also want to learn from others as well. And just reading the initial report that you sent through, the benchmarking report, there's so much there that we realize that we can learn from other organizations. And also, I think other organizations potentially can learn from us in terms of the things that we've been able to implement. So yeah, that's all I think I wanted to say.
Thanks, Wayne. Yeah, that's really interesting. And yeah, really nice to see that link between the ESG and actually what you talked to there about the success and growth of the organisation. Tracy, can I ask the same question to you?
Thank you. So Tracy Bush, One Filed. We support people with learning disabilities and autism across the Fylde coast. So from Fleetwood through Blackpool down to St Anne's and Lytham, around 200 people. We also have about 400 staff, probably our most difficult area in terms of recruitment in social care, as I'm sure you're all aware. But we really focused on the S as well. So we've done a lot of work with our staff. This is the second year that we've done the ESG review with you. And we found it fabulous. So we were previously 2 charities that merged. around 6 million turnover for each charity. We're now around the 14 million, but we're still one of those organisations that I'm sure a lot of you will understand, where we don't have somebody in the cupboard that can do all this work for us. And I always say there's nobody there to come and do this. So having this piece of work done and the support that we've had from Eastside people, we use the half hour as well of getting feedback on where we were and how we are now, and that action planning side of things. And we've really started talking about it so much more in the organisation. Similar, we're doing well on, it just resonates with the overall. We're doing really well on the S and the G. Still need to do a bit more on the G. But the E, there's a lot of work to do on it. So we'll probably go into more detail on that later. So the reasons we decided to do it was we felt like we weren't doing anything. And I think actually the fact we felt like we weren't doing anything, and then we entered, we started doing the process, it actually showed that we were. So it was really, really good to feel that actually we felt like we'd not captured anything, but once we started capturing everything, we were doing some really good work, particularly on the S and the G. So I'm more than happy if anybody wants to contact us through the chat or later to talk about that, because I think it gives you that really positive bit to see that actually we thought we were at zero, but we've moved forward leaps and bounds over the last 2 years and continuing to do that. So that's the very brief bit from my point of view.
Thanks, Tracy. That's great, and that experience that you just said, actually, it's quite useful because doing the survey just helps us to surface actually where we are and what we're already actually doing pretty well. We've heard that again and again from other colleagues like yourself who are doing the survey. So that's really interesting. Maybe worth me just underlining for everybody. So what you get back from doing the surveys, you get an individual report for your organisation. It's benchmark against, you're benchmarking the different areas against the rest of the cohort. And this year, as Tracy was just mentioning, we also offered a free advice session for folks to then talk with one of our consultants about how to then start to deploy the findings for themselves into their organisation. Okay, so my second question, I'm going to turn to you, Roberta, bring you into the conversation, is I want to kind of go into more depth around the S of ESG. So for us in the survey, that means two things. So that means either internally, it's about the workforce, or externally, it's about the way we measure social impact. We could have a whole hour just talking about that. But I'm going to pick up the workforce bit first. And I wanted to ask you, Roberta, you've recently published at Akivo the charity salary survey. And I wanted you to, if you would, just give us a view of what you found out about charity pay and to what extent it either aligned or perhaps even contrasted with what we found in this survey.
Absolutely, very happy to talk about that, and thank you again also for Eastside People for sponsoring our pay survey. So we're kind of in a symbiotic relationship on this stuff. So Akivo do an annual pay and equalities survey. This is amongst our members, but also other non-members. We do it with a COSVO, or they're not a COSVO anymore, they're called Charity Leadership Scotland, and CO3, which is an equivalent organisation in Northern Ireland. So we try and get kind of a broad picture. It is amongst members of those organisations, and also, as I said, kind of leaders. So it's chief execs mostly. And it is a self-selecting sample. So with all those caveats kind of in place there. We've been running the survey for for over 10 years, so we've got quite a bank of data there, and we look at kind of a range of indicators on pay, benefits, governance, relationship between the chief exec and the board, and equalities data, including things like social background, protected characteristics, and so on. We had this year the survey achieved 703 responses. So that's about typical. We've had like about 1,000 to 700. So it's about typical. Responses are from organisations of all different sizes. Mostly, I have to say, amongst the smaller. So this year, 59% of responses were from those leading small charities. But then we mustn't forget that the majority of the sector is small charities. When we think of kind of chief exec pay, we always get those kind of reports in the Telegraph and in our mates down the pub, charities, you should do it for free, and those fat cat salaries. It's a very, very tiny proportion of the sector, as we all know, that are the kind of super major charities that do attract kind of higher salaries, set against really, really hard jobs and dealing with hundreds of staff, dealing with very complex organisations. And I think even at the higher end, I think we'll see that those salaries don't keep pace with inflation in many cases, and don't keep pace with other sectors. So I think putting that all into a comparison, when we're looking at the median charity sector pay, so you'll all be surprised about this. Again, our survey has been going for about 10 years, and the figure has been the same for about 10 years, and it is a median, so it looks at kind of the biggest and the lowest and kind of puts it together. It's £60,000, and it has been for about 10 years, with minor kind of variations, but it's around there. Again, the caveats are that's the median. We're looking at the kind of the larger end of the scale, where this year, for instance, the survey responses, we had 13% responses from larger charities, and then the majority of responses were from smaller charities. However, given that we have 10 years worth of data, and it's been running consistently for 10 years, I think we can kind of be fairly sure of that as a median figure. So I think what that tells us, Richard, is it kind of compares quite well with what you're finding in the ESG survey. Yes, we do. Salaries and pay are very important to our sector, but it's not a sector that can keep up generally with rates of inflation and with other sectors. What we also kind of looked at was other benefits, and as you picked up, Rebecca, in your presentation, flexible working seems to be, in our survey too, is the kind of the highest rated benefit. When we ask our survey respondents what are the other benefits that you get, then flexible working hours comes out at the highest with 71%, and then things such as coaching, training, e-learning and leadership development, often through organisations such as ours. So we're a membership, as I said, membership body for chief executives. Once that membership fee, it's a one-off membership fee for the year, and then there are a lot of resources that come with that, and it's not just ours, but also other bodies that offer similar support. Mental health support is also one of the top three kind of extra benefits, and I think that tells us two things. One is that it's needed, because otherwise it wouldn't be quite so up there in the list. But also the value that trustees, because at the end of the day, it's trustees that will have to approve the salaries, will have to approve the packages, place on the well-being of staff and leaders. We'd like to see more in that respect, but it's an example.
Thanks, Roberta. That's great. Yeah, that's really interesting to see that wider picture. So let's go from the wider picture to the more specific. And again, I'm going to ask Tracy and Wayne, if they would, to just talk about that from their own organisational perspective. So no surprise, we know that economic conditions are really tough. But what have you both been able to do in relation to improving, I suppose, fair pay and other staff benefits? I don't know if you'd like to go first.
I'm happy to.
Tracy, yeah, please.
I'll do the sob story first. We work in social care, full stop. So it's been very, very, very difficult. But one of the things that one filed is very lucky with is we didn't look at changing the fact that we also provide housing to some of the people that we support or others. So not only do we provide support, we have the housing side of things. So that does help a little bit with our margins, and when I say a little bit. But we did a big piece of work 2 years ago on looking at how we could streamline ourselves as much as possible and become as flat a structure as possible, focusing on making sure that we could get to the real living wage for the people that are doing the jobs out there, the support workers. So we focused on that. It has had an impact on other things where, when I was saying about somebody in the cupboard type thing, we have reduced the amount of support services we've got and focused totally on getting everybody to the real living wage. We've now managed to get 10p above the real living wage, which we're very proud of, and we're hoping to continue that. The challenges that we've got are any business needs to do business planning, and we've started doing it in September, thinking about next year. We've got a 3-year plan, we've got a 30-year plan for our housing side of things because bricks and mortar's different. But we'll be informed by, well, last week, Lancashire County Council sent us an email out to ask us what our challenges are so that they can think of it from the fee side of things next year. And they'll tell us what our new fees will be in February 2026, which it's just unbelievable. Every year I think, and every year I complain about it, and every year it makes no difference. So the cabinet, each council's cabinet will get together in February and they'll inform social care providers what their fee levels will be. It's never met our challenges and never met what we needed to. So we then have to go back to the drawing board. And I'm sure, Roberta, you're nodding lots, but that'll be the message that you get from all of your members, won't it? So those are our main challenges, but we just really focus on all that stuff you said as well around mental health. We have mental health first aiders and all that side, but the pay bit we felt we needed to focus on, and we have done over the last two years to get to the 10p above real living wage.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. And Wayne, perhaps you could also focus particularly on that point about, I suppose, flexible work and what other ways that you've been able to support staff at your organisation.
Yeah, okay, no problem. Well, as an organization, we're not big enough really even to have pay scales, for example. So, we try to focus on other aspects in order to encourage staff retention and engagement. We're proud to be able to offer the staff above the London living wage. So that for us is something that we're pleased with. But we have really focused on mental health and well-being. So one of the things that we have is an employee assistance program with Vita Health. So that includes a 24-hour helpline for staff if they're experiencing any mental health issues or, are just under pressure or stress for any reasons. And also that service provides podcasts and resources that staff can read to encourage positive mental health. Like with Tracy, we also have mental health first aiders who are obviously trained to sort of identify and manage mental health issues within the team around sort of anxiety, depression, stress, or any problems staff are having around change management or any of those things. We also, again, through our mental health first aiders, have lots of additional activities like lunch walks, book swaps, staff get-togethers, stress reduction sessions. So there's a lot of coming together as a team, both online and in person, so that staff don't feel isolated and are connecting to one another. We also think what's really helped us is having really clear job descriptions with responsibilities really clear. Before I came back in 2020, we didn't have even an induction program. We didn't have a staff handbook. We didn't have appraisals. We didn't have supervision. All of these things have been added, as I say, over the last 3 years, which I think makes a huge difference. And we have a dedicated training budget each year, which gets exhausted. So obviously some of the money will go on mandatory training in GDPR and health and safety, but we also identify specific needs to develop staff in areas where they need help in order to develop. And then also, as I said about the handbook, we didn't have policies in place around anti-bullying, harassment, parental leave. None of these things existed for us 3 years ago as an organization. So those have been huge. Implementing those policies and being able to practice them, I think, has made has made a huge difference. And I think the other thing is, being able to work hybrid, and we are able to have members of staff. I'm Cardiff and London back and forth, but we have members of staff outside of London, in Birmingham and in Newcastle. So again, we're able to recruit talent from other parts of the country through having a policy that is open to flexible working and remote working. So I would say those are probably the key areas that we put in place that we hope makes up for the fact that we don't have pay scales currently, and that pay isn't the only way that we're trying to motivate staff to stay and to feel engaged with us.
Thanks, Wayne. That's great. And yeah, it really resonates a lot of the kind of areas you were just talking to across the survey when we were asking for organisations to tell us how they're getting on in the ES areas. Rebecca was also speaking to earlier. There were just so many just brilliant examples of how, yes, fair pay is obviously important, but how organisations felt like they were going above and beyond in terms of flexible work, supporting around mental health and wellbeing and other bits and pieces that both, you and Tracy, just gave some examples on there. I'm going to move us on to talk more about the environmental side of the survey. And the bit that I wanted to start on here is particularly talking about how certainly those charities that have property, deliver services through accommodation, are going to need to be very mindful over the next few years about improving the energy efficiency of buildings. And I think it was quite a stark part of the survey that we saw that all of the organisations in the survey that do have property at the moment, that I don't think any of them have yet got their properties to completely to that EPC compliance C rating or better. And there's a funding element, I think, to all of that. So my first question, Tracy, to yourself, please, because I know that this affects your organisation. Could you tell us what you're doing at the moment to make your properties more energy efficient, please?
Yeah, thanks. First of all, we commissioned a full condition property survey report, so we could see that and get the EPC ratings through for all of us, because we didn't even know what they were in some of our properties. A lot of our properties were either not gifted to us, but a family member then wanted to sell a house, or it was all that nice stuff that happened years and years ago. So we've ended up with some wonderful properties, but very old properties. So that's the difficult bit as well. So we did commission the condition property survey work. We've had a look at that, looked at the EPC, and then part of the 30-year plan that we've got is to look at where we can make some changes and what we can do. And then we're actually, it's too much for the charity to be able to fund the changes. And therefore, we've looked at how we can move those people into an environment that's better for them, and always looking at improving it for the people, but move it so that we're actually looking at more of new builds and that side of things, which we haven't really looked at before. We've always in our area looked at great old buildings that we can convert into flats, or really nice big massive bungalows that are near to the seafront and all that kind of thing, so that they're close. So a lot of it was our property condition survey work that we had done, followed by a plan for those properties that we would dispose of, and then the quick fixes. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of quick fixes, and that's been the biggest problem. But one of the things I said, there must be some quick pieces of work we can do here. But actually, they're not. A good example is we're just looking at a big piece of work on a property. And by 2035, we should be looking at non-gas boilers and all that side of things. So we had a huge discussion around what we do now, but the cost of it was outside of our budget. So we've decided to get it ready. So we're going to insulate the outside, but we're not actually going to do it yet, but just get things ready and start thinking more about getting the building ready for it, but thinking cost versus actually making it ready yet. So there's a plan, and I think that's the bit that's been really key, getting a plan for it together. And unfortunately, it does mean from our 55 properties we've got, we will be looking at about 7 that we will be over the next years. We will be looking at how we can sell those properties and move to different properties. Difficulty in our area is trying to identify those properties that are also fit for the future as well. So that's a very brief summary, but I'm happy to add more detail in if you want, Richard.
Yeah, and I think Tracy, that's really useful. So I'm going to bring Nick into the conversation now. Nick, it'd be great to get your perspective on this. And I think maybe the first place to start, because I know that at SIB you've through some of your funds have been supporting charities to improve the environmental efficiency of their buildings and their organisations. I mean, I think firstly, maybe you could just tell us, if that's okay, about some of that experience that you've been having with those funds, please.
Yeah, sure. And if people aren't familiar with us, we've been around about 25 years, and we generally do loans and grants to charities and social enterprises, about 800 million to date. I do think buildings and transport are where you get the energy savings, really. So like if you're a charity that doesn't have buildings and transport involved, you are a bit more limited on this side. I was told that when we went fully remote as an organisation, which isn't an option to everyone, that was probably the single largest positive environmental thing we did. I think we did research into the market, Richard, which mirrors some of the findings in your survey. So we reckon there's about 7,500 community buildings that don't meet energy efficiency standards. And we've also found that some of the groups spending on average kind of 15% of their income on energy bills, but up to 50% in some cases. It is a huge problem and not addressed nearly enough. There are schemes for residential stuff. There are schemes for public sector buildings. There are not many schemes, in fact, none, for community and charity buildings. To address that, at least in part, we've started something called the Energy Resilience Fund, which is I would describe it as a softer loan fund, which is for all sorts of energy efficiency. So people are using that for insulation and lighting and the sort of stuff Tracy was just describing, as well as solar and the odd robot lawn mower in there as well. So it's vehicles too. But I think it is looking out for grant schemes. Some of those are coming from government. There's some sports stuff coming for those of you in that field. The National Youth Strategy has just been announced. Happy National Youth Strategy Day to all those who celebrate. There's going to be some more talking about 350 million of kind of capital spend within that. So those are the opportunities where you can refurbish, renovate, and use some of those funds to upgrade your buildings at the same time. So that's some of the stuff we see. And we do think, I suppose, for us, it's important because it really ties together some of the things you've been talking about. Actually, the biggest strain on those with buildings is their energy bills at the moment. And if we can't mitigate that, it just affects their income to do everything else they want to do. So in that sense, the E is tied to all the other stuff that Wayne and Tracy and Roberta have been talking about as well.
Yeah, no, thanks, Nick. It makes me think in there that there's, as well as the investment and the costs and that Tracy, you were talking to in terms of your own organisation, there is also potentially opportunity in terms of reducing annual expenditure on energy costs. So I'm just interested to get your perspectives on that. I mean, maybe Tracy first, from when you were looking at, you talked about a plan and putting a plan in place, that sounded important. Did you also find that if you could get the investment, then there was some really interesting potential savings that you could achieve, albeit further down the line?
Yeah, definitely. And the good thing from our point of view is our beneficiaries are the ones who will save. So they are the ones that pay the bills. So the people with learning disabilities and autism are the ones that pay their bills. So anything we can do to reduce the bills is a bonus, especially with benefits being so difficult as well as another side. But yeah, a lot of it is around the insulation of old buildings. We're also by the sea. I went to a house the other day where how on earth it's happened. It's it's empty at the minute, and we've got sand coming in through the literally sand blowing in through that to the house. So anything we can do around improving the insulation and that side of things will reduce the cost. And those are probably the quick fixes. So we are in a good position financially, and we are using a lot of our reserves to do this. We are struggling to find grants. And I have actually known Nick for a long time, but until today, didn't actually think of contacting Nick. So you might be getting a call after this, Nick. But yeah, we can't get, as a charity, and we're not a registered social landlord, we can't get grants from Homes England. So everything we do is coming from our own purse at the minute. So yes, more than happy to look at other things, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's right, Richard. And then the other thing I'd say is like, in some cases, it used to deliver savings, but might now just be putting a cap on the increases because energy bills are just going like that. So actually, that's still the investment will mitigate the increases that we're seeing in energy bills as well. I think Tracy's right. Part of it, and this is a good one for Akivo to lobby on, is access to some of those schemes that the public sector and private sector have offered to that sometimes charities and social enterprises are excluded from. But there is plenty we can do as a small organisation. You know, you can still look at your supply chain, you can still do your recycling, you can look at the kind of team benefits and incentives and learn from others. So I think whether that's your transport options, your encouraging staff to switch to renewable energy suppliers, etc., etc. There's lots of smaller things you can do, even if you're not a building or an owner of cars and vans as well.
Actually, I wanted to pick up on that, Nick, because that's true of us. We have a very old house in North London, and we have made upgrades. But other ways that we have tried to address environmental sustainability has been around ensuring with our procurement policy that any suppliers are as eco-friendly as possible. And also in our ethical investments as well, we exclude, fossil fuels and extractive industries that are incredible in terms of net zero plans, those kind of things. So we feel that we contribute in that way, in a small way. But I think it's another way when we don't have the resources and finances ourselves to have an action plan in place. We just try to chip away at these things through those kind of initiatives.
Yeah, thanks, Wei. That's interesting because we saw on that environmental part of the survey that there were lots of comments, particularly I think probably for smaller organisations, that were saying that on the environment side that they're not making as much progress as in kind of areas around kind of the social parts and the governance, and also kind of asking, look, how can we, where are the quick wins, where are the easy wins? Because at the moment, a lot of these asks seem to be expensive and hard to manage. So I think that what you're talking to there is really useful. I don't know if anyone else wants to just kind of come in there and just offer any thoughts there on, if particularly for small organisations, how we can make kind of progress in that area. Yeah, Roberta, please.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about this. So until quite recently, Akivo kind of we're trying to do work with our members in terms of pushing climate action, and it's and we had a few years ago we had like a climate pledge for our leaders to kind of make a commitment as chief execs, as trustee boards as well, to commit to what can we do in this area. And we found similar to in this ESG survey, there's a lot of desire to do something, but what do we do? And signing up to something, so I'm going to do something, isn't the same as actually then going away to do it, because it's much harder than that. The quick wins, the kind of quick wins that we saw are, as Nick was saying, for those organisations that had had buildings or cars, fleets, charity shops. There are kind of some things that can be done there. A few years ago, it was quite popular, quite the big thing to do, to kind of measure your carbon footprint, and that's something that I know is picked up in the ESG report as well. But I think where we were getting to in some of our discussions was, okay, you've measured your carbon footprint, and then what? Because there's also that you can invest in things that you think are ticking a box, but it doesn't actually move anything forward. So if it's relevant, like for instance for Akivo, a bit like Nick's organisation, we're small, we're all remote. we'd made a pledge to measure our carbon footprint, but then thought that there's actually not much point doing that because there's nothing else we can do in terms of reducing carbon. But looking at things like your policies, as Wayne was saying, your procurement policies, your internal policies. Somebody mentioned investment policies. If you're lucky enough to have the funds to kind of look at investment, but there's also something about uniting climate focused theories or climate focused action to your mission. That's something that we were looking at Akiva. Like, how do you make it part of your mission, not just a thing to do to kind of tick a box with, and looking at it in that way. So we've been working quite a bit with NPC, Everyone's Environment Project. So if anyone wants to go and have a look, they've got lots of resources on their website as well about kind of things that organisations can do. So just a plug for that as well.
Thanks, Roberta. Right, we're in the final laps, folks. I've got one more question that I'm going to ask the panel about EDI and diversity, and then we'll wrap up. I've been trying to scan the chat, and I think that the team at ESG people have been keeping well up with kind of following the questions and commenting on those. So I think we're in a good place on that. There is a couple of places that guests have asked, can they connect with different people? And so perhaps panel, if you could just have a quick scan down the chat, as I think a couple of places they've asked about connecting with yourselves, that'd be great. And so, yes, so my question is around EDI and diversity. So we designed the survey so that it wasn't a separate pull-out, but it's weaved through the environment, it's weaved through social, and it's weaved through governance. And it means something slightly different in each case. It will be of no surprise to anybody that in terms of ambition, it was the area that came through very, very strongly again and again, that organisations, whatever their size, was really ambitious to do more in this area. But the gap between ambition and progress was the widest gap across the whole survey. In other words, we want to do more here, but we're kind of struggling really to embed and implement. And I just wanted to ask you all, actually, just for a thought on that. And Wayne, I'm going to come to you first. Perhaps you could share what you're doing at your organisation.
Okay, no problem. So for me, this is one of the things I'm most proudest of as an organisation. So we went through an accreditation process with the National Centre for Diversity to become investors in diversity is the kite mark. It's a bit misleading because actually what the National Centre of Diversity implement is these 6 principles that they call FREDI, which is freedom, respect, equality, diversity, inclusion, and engagement. And they come into your organization, they interview your staff, they interviewed our members, they interviewed our trainees, and they interviewed our external partners and collaborators, and to ask basically where did they think we were in terms of the FREDI principles as an organization. And like Eastside, you get benchmark against other organizations, and they went away and they came back with an action plan for us across 10 areas of our business about where we could embed better FREDI principles and have a better EDI lens. Last week, we found out that we came 43rd in the index of 100 employers, which shocked me so much. I mean, it was a huge delight because we're such a small organization and there's still so much more to do. And again, like with the survey that you did, a range of organizations of different sizes. So to come in the top 50 was hugely motivating. And I know the staff also were delighted with that. And again, it kind of touches upon the things I've already said. With investors in diversity, yes, it looks at protected characteristics and how you can increase representation across your organization, but it takes a much more holistic approach. So it does look at, your strategy, your management, how you recruit, how you retain people, rewards on performance, your procurement policies, how you communicate. So they looked at all of our work. They gave us all these recommendations, and all the things that we have implemented have been based on this accreditation process. So I think having that really helps you realize what your baseline is, how you compare to others, where you're really lagging behind, and what you can put in place to meet it. And then they come in 2 years later, once you have the accreditation, They give you another plan based on, so they'll measure the same people that they already interviewed, and they'll see whether those perceptions of whether you're meeting the Freddie principles has gone up or down. And then they give you another plan based on that feedback. So we're halfway through the second plan now, and hopefully working towards reaccreditation next year. But it's nice to be, in a way, have accountability. You're being scrutinized, yeah, but you're also getting advice along the way about what's missing, how you could improve your policies, and you're allocated an assessor who, as well as assessing you, kind of works with you throughout the process to say, actually, this policy hasn't quite met what we were looking for, or you should be doing this more, or maybe this is missing. So you get that advice all the way through. So in terms of EDI, that's what I would go for, an accreditation mark of some sort.
Congratulations. There's a question, just perhaps you could look in the chat, that someone's asking about what the name of the tool is. Perhaps you could respond on that. That'd be great.
No problem.
Same question, Tracy.
Well, wow. We've not done anything externally. We've done a lot of work internally and decided we need to do more, which I think most organisations would say that. Or we've put a people plan together and looked at all of our different areas and started to collect internal demographics on everything and look at that. And then we've got a specific EDI plan that we've got that the head of HR is leading on, where we can look at each of the areas and look at what we can do. So at the minute, I think our feeling is that we're just going to concentrate internally and get a plan together. And practically, we feel we've improved because, yeah, again, I think it's similar to ESG generally. We're talking about it more. So I think that feeling that we're talking about it more, we're looking externally, particularly from a recruitment point of view when people come in. Our board is extremely white British, and we keep trying and trying, yeah, we still need to keep trying. And I think that's the bit for us. We just keep moving forward, and not as well as we would like to do or as quickly as we like to do. But at the minute, very internal, we haven't done anything. Well, I suppose we have. We've done the Eastside People Survey, haven't we? But that's come out through that. So yeah, but that's where we are at the minute.
Richard, I was going to be very brief, but just to add, I think similar to Wayne's journey, like we signed up to the Diversity Forum, which is for social investment, but it has a similar set of pledges and actions that follow. I think the learning from us is not try and do everything at once. So really try and work out what the key priority amongst that very broad landscape is for your organisation and start to address that. When I joined the organisation, a bit similar to what Tracy's described, most of our board and investment committees looked a bit like me or my dad, actually, in reality. So that was a key priority for us in terms of being representative and accountable to the sort of charities and social enterprises we serve. We've addressed that, and then we move on to kind of next priorities and so on. So I think for us, it's been that constantly evolving set of actions that we need to address and trying to work out what the key priority for us in the next kind of 3, 6, 12 months as well.
Thank you all. It feels insanely too soon, but I have to bring the discussion to an end. That's all we've got time for. But a massive thank you to the panel. Perhaps we can kind of do the online thing and send emojis and congratulations and claps and all those types of things to them. I know you're all super busy, so dropping in and helping us today has been brilliant. For those who are attending, you'll get an exit poll in a moment, just on your emails. If you could just help us with that, that would be amazing. A couple of just final bits from me. Please do look out for those reporting changes that are coming through in 2026. They'll apply to all organisations with required changes in reporting to the larger ones. More than anything, probably this project and the survey shows to us just how much good practice individual organisations like Wayne's, like Tracy's, but like everyone else that is participating in the survey is doing. And so we're trying our hardest to surface that good practice and support you all as a peer group to, I suppose, learn from each other. You'll find lots of those kind of examples of good practice in the report. From an Eastside People point of view, we developed this year a service to support charities to develop their own deeper strategy around ESG. So if you wanted to ask us about any of that, then please just drop us a message. And that just leaves me to say the next survey is out on May the 26th, 2026, and you'll be hearing from us before that, but we'd love to have even more organisations do that. So most of all, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you all have a good day. Thank you.